The stage lights gleamed against the polished floor of the Oprah Winfrey Show. The crowd buzzed with excitement. After all, it wasn't every day that a Hollywood action legend like Steven Seagal appeared live on Oprah's stage. Cameras rolled, applause thundered, and the host walked in with her trademark smile, ready to dig deep into Seagal's mysterious persona. Steven, calm and composed as ever, sat back in his chair, his hands resting loosely in his lap. Dressed in his usual all-black outfit with prayer beads wrapped around his wrist, he looked less like a movie star and more like a monk who had just stepped out of meditation. His eyes carried that familiar stillness, unreadable, unbothered. "Steven Seagal, everyone," Oprah announced with flair as the crowd erupted. "The man, the legend, the martial arts master?" She laughed lightly, but there was a subtle edge to her tone, a curiosity that hinted at where this conversation was about to go. They began smoothly, chatting about his films, his years in Japan, and his martial arts discipline. Seagal responded softly, speaking about discipline, balance, and humility. The audience listened, intrigued by his calm, thoughtful energy. But then Oprah leaned forward. Her voice shifted, still polite but sharper. "So, Steven," she began, "you've often spoken about your spiritual journey, your connection with Buddhism and inner peace." She smiled slightly. "Be honest, do you really live like a monk off camera? Or is that just part of the movie mystique?" The audience chuckled lightly. Steven smiled politely, saying nothing yet. Oprah continued, pressing a little harder. "I mean, you've been in action films all your life. Guns, fights, explosions, and suddenly you're meditating and preaching peace." The crowd laughed again, sensing humor in her words. But something about Seagal's silence caught their attention. His eyes didn't waver. He simply sat there, still unmoving, the kind of stillness that made everyone else restless. A subtle tension filled the air. Oprah tilted her head, almost teasing. "What does a Hollywood action hero really know about enlightenment, Steven?" The audience leaned in, but no one expected what would happen next when Oprah decided to mock his faith on live television. The air inside the studio changed. The laughter faded slightly as Oprah adjusted in her chair, crossing one leg over the other. She held her cue cards but wasn't looking at them anymore. She was locked on Steven, curious, maybe even skeptical. "So tell me," she said with a faint smirk, "do you actually meditate every day? Like on candles, silence, and all that?" The audience chuckled softly. Steven's lips curved in a mild, patient smile. "Yes," he said calmly. "Meditation and prayer are a part of my life, and they help me find balance in a noisy world." Oprah nodded slowly, eyes narrowing just a little. "Balance in a noisy world," she repeated almost playfully. Interesting words coming from a man who's made a living, breaking bones on screen. Laughter filled the studio again. The camera zoomed in on Steven's face, still serene. He didn't interrupt, didn't defend himself. He just let the silence hang for a moment before replying softly. "Violence in film is fiction, Oprah. Peace in real life. That's my truth." But Oprah wasn't done. The tone of her voice sharpened just slightly, enough for everyone watching to sense the tension. "I don't mean to offend," she said, "but do you think people really take your spiritual side seriously? I mean, it's hard to picture Steven Seagal, the tough guy, sitting in lotus position and chanting mantras." The crowd laughed louder this time. Some even clapped, thinking it was all part of lighthearted fun. Steven gave a faint chuckle but said nothing. He looked at the floor for a second, his fingers tracing the edge of his prayer beads. Oprah leaned forward again. "Come on, Steven. You've been called one of the most intense actors in Hollywood. You've broken ribs, flipped people over tables, and now you're talking about compassion." That last word, or compassion, hung in the air like a challenge. The camera caught Steven's expression shift slightly. Still calm, but firmer now. He lifted his gaze, meeting Oprah's eyes directly. "I think compassion," he said slowly, "is not about how you fight. It's about how you live when no one's watching." For a moment, the room went quiet. The audience didn't know whether to clap or wait. Oprah blinked, caught off guard by the weight of his tone. But instead of backing down, she tried to play it off with humor. "Well, I suppose you'd have to have a lot of patience to survive in Hollywood with that mindset," she said, chuckling. "You really think meditation can solve real-world problems? Wars, crime, hate?" Her voice was teasing, but now it felt like she was testing him. Steven smiled faintly. "Not everything can be solved with meditation," he replied. but nothing can be solved without peace. There was no laughter this time. The crowd listened. A few people nodded, but Oprah wasn't done stirring the pot. She tilted her head and said, "Okay, but let's be honest, Steven. You've had your controversies too. People say one thing on TV and live another off it. How can viewers be sure your faith isn't just part of your public image?" Gasps rippled through the audience. That question crossed a line, direct, pointed, and personal. Steven sat perfectly still. The silence stretched for several seconds, heavy, uncomfortable, almost electric. You could hear the faint hum of the lights above the stage. Then, finally, he spoke. "I think faith doesn't need anyone's approval. Oprah, the truth about who I am doesn't live on the screen, it lives in my actions." The audience murmured quietly, unsure how to react. Oprah smiled, trying to lighten the tension. "Well, that's certainly one way to look at it," she said, glancing toward the audience for reassurance. But the mood had shifted. Steven wasn't joking anymore, and neither was the energy in the room. He leaned forward slightly, voice still gentle but cutting through the silence. "You know, sometimes people laugh at things they don't understand. That's all right. Understanding comes later." The studio went pin-drop silent. Even Oprah looked momentarily speechless, a rare sight for one of the most confident talk show hosts in the world. The camera slowly zoomed in on Steven's face. Calm, collected, unshaken. From the crowd, a woman whispered, "He's not angry. He's just in control." And that's when the viewers at home started feeling it too. The shift, the quiet power of someone who refuses to react in anger. Have you ever seen someone mocked for their beliefs? Tell us in the comments, and also drop where you're watching this from, your country and city. Let's see how far respect travels. The audience waited for Oprah's next move. The show had suddenly turned into something no one expected, a live clash of ego and inner peace. And as the applause slowly started to fade, everyone in that studio, including Oprah, sensed that this wasn't just another celebrity interview. Something deeper was about to unfold. The tension inside the studio had grown thick enough to touch. The live audience, once laughing freely, now sat frozen, caught between curiosity and discomfort. The mood had shifted from entertainment to something far more real. Steven Seagal hadn't moved much since Oprah's last question. His posture was perfect. Shoulders straight, hands folded on his lap, eyes lowered slightly. He looked like a monk meditating in the middle of chaos. The camera zoomed in. His face was unreadable. Oprah leaned forward, sensing the silence but mistaking it for surrender. She smiled, trying to keep the tone light. "Steven, don't get me wrong," she said, her voice honeyed but firm. "I'm just trying to understand how someone who spent decades in action films, shooting, fighting, destroying, can suddenly claim to be an ambassador of peace." Laughter rippled through the room again, hesitant but present. Seagal didn't respond. Oprah chuckled softly, tapping her cue cards against her leg. "Come on, Steven, be honest. Do you really live by these Buddhist principles you talk about? Or is this Hollywood spirituality?" A few audience members laughed again, but not as loudly this time. The humor had a bitter edge now. Seagal finally lifted his head. His eyes, calm and piercing, met Oprah's. His voice was low but clear. "Oprah, peace doesn't mean running away from conflict. It means mastering yourself in the middle of it." The audience fell silent. Even Oprah's smile faltered slightly. "Well," she said with a half-smile, "you certainly have mastered the art of staying calm." Most people would have snapped by now. Steven smiled faintly. "When you practice stillness long enough, you stop needing to prove anything." That line hit differently. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some nodded. Some whispered. A few clapped quietly before Oprah spoke again, regaining her composure. "So you're saying," she pressed, "that even when people question your beliefs, maybe even mock them, you just let it go?" He nodded slowly. "If someone mocks my faith, it doesn't harm me. It only reveals who they are." The studio gasped. The words were calm, but sharp enough to slice through the air. Oprah's face stiffened just for a second. Then she forced a polite laugh. "Well, that's one way to look at it," she said quickly, scanning the audience for support. But this time they weren't laughing with her. They were watching him. Steven leaned forward slightly, his voice gaining quiet strength. People confuse humility with weakness, but humility is strength under control. I've spent my life learning when to fight and when to stay still. The silence that followed was heavy, not awkward, but powerful. You could feel the respect starting to shift in the room. Oprah looked down at her cue cards, clearly thrown off rhythm. "That's interesting," she muttered before looking back up. "But let's be honest, Steven, you've had controversies too. People say you can be difficult, that you have a temper. Doesn't that go against everything you're saying now?" The crowd gasped again. She'd pushed it further than ever. Steven took a slow breath. You could see his chest rise and fall once. Then he said calmly, "I'm not perfect, no one is. But faith isn't about pretending to be flawless. It's about knowing when you've fallen and getting up without bitterness." There it was, the kind of statement that silences a room. Oprah blinked twice. For the first time, she seemed unsure of what to say. She shifted in her chair, smiled awkwardly, and said, "That's quite profound." Steven nodded gently. "Truth doesn't need to be loud, Oprah. It only needs to be real." That line landed like a thunderclap wrapped in silk. The audience erupted into applause, not the usual talk show clapping, but genuine, heartfelt appreciation. Some even stood. The camera panned across the faces in the crowd, surprised, moved, thoughtful. Oprah tried to steer the moment back to humor, but the balance had shifted. The power in the room no longer belonged to her. She looked at Steven, searching for a way to regain control. "You seem so composed. Don't you ever get angry when people say things that cross the line?" He smiled faintly again. "Anger is like a fire," he said. "You can use it to cook your food, or you can let it burn your house down. The choice is always yours." The audience broke into another round of applause, louder this time. Oprah leaned back in her chair, stunned by how gracefully he had turned every jab into wisdom. The cameraman zoomed in again on Seagal's face, eyes calm, lips pressed in a faint knowing smile. If you were sitting in Steven Seagal's place, how would you react if someone mocked your beliefs on live TV? Would you stay calm or walk off the stage? Type your answer below in the comments. As the applause slowly faded, Oprah straightened in her chair, trying to transition, but it was too late. Everyone watching could tell that Steven Seagal had quietly taken control of the entire room without raising his voice once. And deep down, Oprah knew it too. The studio lights seemed brighter now, almost too bright, as if even the universe leaned closer to witness what was happening. The cameras kept rolling, but the air was thick, heavy with the weight of something unscripted, something real. Oprah shifted in her chair, crossing one leg over the other. Her face wore the same smile, but her eyes gave away what she felt: unease. She had faced politicians, billionaires, and movie legends on this very stage, but never someone who refused to play the game. Steven Seagal sat calmly, still as stone. He hadn't raised his voice once. He hadn't defended himself. Yet somehow it was Oprah who now seemed defensive. "Steven," she said, voice softer now, "I think people just have a hard time understanding. You've changed. The Steven Seagal they remember from movies, and that guy fought, he took no nonsense. But the man sitting here, he's different." Steven tilted his head slightly as if weighing her words. Then with that same quiet authority he replied, "People mistake evolution for contradiction. The man who knows peace is often the same one who's seen the worst of war." The audience murmured again, low, thoughtful hums of agreement. A few even clapped. Oprah smiled politely, but it didn't hide the flicker of frustration on her face. She tried to pivot the topic, looking for safe ground. "So let's talk about your faith," she said quickly. "You've said you found Buddhism years ago, but some say it's just a phase, a Hollywood thing. What do you say to that?" Steven leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees, fingers interlocked. His gaze never wavered. "When you find peace," he said, "you stop needing approval. My faith isn't for the camera, it's for my soul." You could almost hear the collective exhale from the audience. He wasn't answering Oprah's question. He was teaching a lesson. Oprah laughed awkwardly, the sound just a bit too loud. "Well, I can't argue with that," she said. "But come on, Steven, you've lived a big life. Fame, money, controversy. Surely you've lost your temper before?" A few people in the audience chuckled. The question was sharp and meant to draw him out. Seagal nodded slowly. "Of course," he said. "I've made mistakes, but anger never made me stronger. It only made me smaller." That line landed deep. Even Oprah paused. The live audience broke into applause again, louder than before. A camera operator whispered to his director, This man's flipping the whole energy. Oprah smiled tightly. She wasn't angry, not yet, but the balance had undeniably shifted. The audience wasn't laughing at Seagal anymore. They were listening. She leaned forward again. "You talk about peace," she said carefully, "but the world sees you as a fighter. That's a contradiction, isn't it?" Steven's lips curved into a faint smile. A sword is useless until it learns stillness. Power without discipline destroys itself. The studio fell silent. A few people gasped softly. Oprah blinked twice, unsure if she'd just been corrected or educated. "You really believe that?" she asked, almost whispering now. "I live it," he replied simply. A wave of applause swept across the crowd. Louder, more sustained this time. Even those who had laughed earlier were now nodding, leaning forward in their seats. You could feel it. Seagal had turned what was meant to be an interrogation into a sermon about humility and control. Oprah sat back, visibly absorbing the weight of his words. For a moment, she said nothing. Then, almost defensively, she asked, "But why bring faith into Hollywood at all? Why not just keep it private?" Steven's tone remained calm, his words deliberate. "Because light doesn't hide in darkness. If faith stays private, how will anyone learn from it? People think strength means shouting. I've learned true strength is silence that doesn't break," the audience erupted. Cheers, applause, even a few people standing now. The entire room was caught in his calm, magnetic gravity. Oprah looked around, realizing she had lost control of the tone completely. What had started as lighthearted teasing had turned into a masterclass on dignity. She smiled, trying to hold the moment. "You know," she said with a laugh, "I wasn't expecting you to turn my show into a philosophy lecture." Steven chuckled softly. "You asked honest questions," he said. "I thought you deserved honest answers." That line, perfectly balanced between respect and confidence, hit like a knockout. The audience roared again. Some even whistled. Oprah laughed, but it was the kind of laugh that said, "I've been humbled." Gracefully. The moment was so powerful that even the crew forgot to cue the next segment. Cameras stayed locked on Seagal's face. Calm, strong, eyes filled with something deeper than confidence. Conviction. The host who had once controlled every conversation was now sitting quietly, letting her guest lead the emotional rhythm of her own show. Have you ever seen someone stay calm while being challenged or mocked and completely change the energy of the room? Tell me where you're watching this from, your country and city, and if you've ever had a moment like that yourself. As the crowd continued to cheer, Oprah leaned toward Seagal and said quietly, "You know, I think you just taught all of us something tonight." Steven smiled humbly. "I didn't teach," he said. "I just shared what I've lived." And with that, he leaned back, crossing his arms loosely, as the applause rolled through the studio like thunder, not for the action star, but for the man who had turned mockery into mastery. The studio, moments ago filled with laughter and casual chatter, now sat in reverent quiet. You could hear the faint hum of the cameras, the shuffle of the audience leaning forward, the soft whisper of anticipation. Something extraordinary was unfolding on live television, and everyone knew it. Oprah straightened in her chair, her poise slipping slightly under the weight of the moment. She had interviewed thousands, presidents, icons, philosophers, but what she was feeling now wasn't just admiration or surprise. It was something deeper. Steven Seagal had managed to shift the entire emotional frequency of the show. Still, she wasn't done. Oprah was never one to back away from a challenge. "Steven," she began, voice measured but probing, "I can see how serious you are about your beliefs. But people might say, isn't it easy to preach peace when you're rich, famous, and admired? It's harder when life knocks you down. Don't you think your position makes it easier to stay calm?" The question hung in the air like a test. It was direct and even a little confrontational. The audience murmured softly. Steven took a breath, eyes closing for a brief second as if he were centering himself. When he opened them, his voice was calm but carried a new kind of force, quiet, yet commanding. "Oprah," he said, "peace doesn't come from comfort. It's born in pain. You don't learn stillness when life is easy. You learn it when your world falls apart." A ripple of emotion spread through the crowd. Oprah's expression softened. She hadn't expected that answer. He continued, his tone deepening with each word. I've been betrayed, misunderstood, mocked, sometimes by people I trusted most. But that's when you discover what faith really is. Faith isn't a feeling. It's choosing light when everything around you is dark. The studio went dead silent. Even the crew stopped moving. Then Seagal looked directly at Oprah, not as a guest challenging a host, but as one human soul speaking to another. "People think faith makes you weak," he said. "But real faith, it's what keeps you from breaking." The audience broke into spontaneous applause. Some even stood up. A few women in the front row clapped through tears. Oprah blinked slowly, visibly moved. She leaned forward slightly, resting her chin on her hand. No longer the interviewer, just a listener. "You've clearly been through a lot," she said softly. "But what made you turn to faith in the first place? What was the moment that changed everything for you?" Seagal paused for a moment, his eyes distant, as if revisiting a memory buried deep in time. "There was a time," he said slowly, "when I thought strength meant control, dominating, winning, never showing weakness. But one night I met a monk in Japan. He told me, 'You cannot fight the world until you stop fighting yourself.'" A long pause. Then he smiled faintly. "That one sentence broke me open. I realized I had spent years fighting battles outside when the real war was inside." You could feel the energy in the room shift again, from curiosity to reverence. Even Oprah seemed humbled. She nodded thoughtfully. "That's powerful," she said. "But how do you live that way in a world that rewards ego?" Seagal's reply was instant, his tone firm yet compassionate. "By remembering who you serve. Fame fades. Money disappears. But the heart you keep pure, that's eternal." That line hit everyone. You could almost hear people exhale as if releasing the weight of their own egos. The crowd applauded again, but this time, there was no cheering, only the sound of respect. Oprah smiled, a real one this time. "Steven," she said gently, "I'll admit I didn't expect this conversation to go this way." "You've surprised me," he chuckled quietly. "Most people come looking for the fighter," he said. "Few stay long enough to see the student." Laughter rolled softly through the room, not mocking but warm. Oprah joined in, nodding. "Maybe that's what makes this moment so special," she said. "You didn't defend yourself. You didn't argue, you just stayed calm." Seagal smiled again. "When the truth stands still, it doesn't need to fight to be seen." A roar of applause filled the studio. People were now standing, clapping, cheering, not for the movie star, but for the message. If you were on that stage, and someone questioned your beliefs in front of millions, would you stay calm like Steven or defend yourself? Comment below and tell me where you're watching this from. The camera cut back to Oprah, who looked genuinely reflective now. She wasn't playing to the audience anymore. She was processing. "You know," she said, "I think we all just learned something important about faith, patience, and grace under pressure." Steven nodded humbly. "You don't need to preach to teach," he said. "Sometimes silence is the loudest sermon." The line landed like lightning. The entire audience stood again, clapping, whistling, cheering louder than ever before. Even Oprah rose to her feet, clapping slowly, smiling with a mix of admiration and disbelief. In that instant, Steven Seagal wasn't a guest anymore. He was a mirror, reflecting to millions what strength really looks like. And as the applause echoed across the studio, even Oprah seemed to realize it. The man she'd once tried to test had turned her own show into a lesson on humility, faith, and the quiet power of grace. When the cameras cut and the bright studio lights dimmed, there was a stillness in the air, the kind of silence that only follows something truly powerful. Oprah stood still, clapping lightly, while Steven Seagal simply smiled and bowed his head in quiet gratitude. The audience lingered even after the show ended. People weren't rushing for selfies or autographs, and they were thinking. You could see it in their faces. Some whispered to each other, "I didn't know he was like that. He's so different from his movie image." That was deep. Within hours of the episode airing, the internet exploded. Clips of the interview began circulating on every major platform: YouTube, Twitter, TikTok, Facebook. But it wasn't the usual entertainment gossip that caught fire. It was one moment, the exact second Steven Seagal said, "If someone mocks my faith, it doesn't harm me. It only reveals who they are." That quote became an instant viral soundbite. Millions began sharing it, captioning it with words like respect, faith over ego, power in silence. Within 24 hours, Hashtags like our Steven Seagal speechless moment and faith and dignity trended globally. People from all over the world posted clips, edits, and reaction videos. Spiritual leaders, motivational speakers, and even atheists praised the way Seagal handled the exchange. It wasn't about religion anymore. It was about how he handled disrespect with peace. A viral tweet read, "This is how you respond when mocked. Not with anger, but with grace." Steven Seagal just taught the internet a masterclass. Even Oprah's official page posted the clip captioned, "One of the most unexpectedly profound conversations we've had on this stage." Steven Seagal reminds us, strength doesn't always shout. The comment section was a flood of admiration. He didn't argue. He educated. Now I see why they call him a master. Oprah met her match in calm energy. Meanwhile, news outlets picked it up. Entertainment shows replayed the interview in slow motion, highlighting the now iconic moment where Oprah fell silent and the audience erupted in applause. Articles titled, "Steven Seagal silences Oprah with a single line" filled social media feeds. But while the internet debated and dissected the moment, Seagal himself stayed quiet. No interviews, no statements, no public comments, just silence, again proving his point. Oprah, however, couldn't stay silent for long. A few days later, she addressed the viral moment during another broadcast. Sitting on the same stage, she said with a smile, "You know, sometimes on this show I get schooled. Steven Seagal did that, not with anger, not with pride, but with peace. And I respect that." The audience applauded. She continued, "It reminded me, faith is personal, but dignity is universal." That admission made the clip go viral again. This time it wasn't about who was right or wrong. It was about how two strong personalities found understanding on live TV. Back at Steven's home, his assistant showed him the trending videos and messages of support from around the world. There were millions of comments, and from soldiers, monks, single mothers, college students, all saying the same thing. "You inspired me to stay calm when mocked." Seagal read a few, smiled softly, and said only one line, "I didn't want to win an argument. I wanted to show peace can stand its ground." That quote, too, became viral. Have you ever had a moment where someone tried to push your buttons but you stayed calm, and it changed the situation? Tell your story below, and also drop your city and country. Let's see how far Steven Seagal's message has reached. As the days passed, late-night talk shows discussed it, reaction channels broke down his body language, and millions replayed the footage just to hear that tone, the calm, unbothered voice that carried more weight than any argument. Even celebrities chimed in. A-list actors tweeted respect. Motivational speakers used the clip in seminars. Schools and companies started using the video as an example of emotional control under pressure. But the most surprising reaction came from Oprah herself. A week after the episode aired, she invited Seagal back, not for another debate, but for a conversation about faith and humility. In the teaser for that follow-up episode, Oprah said, "Sometimes the most powerful guest isn't the loudest. It's the one who teaches you something you didn't know you needed to learn." The internet went wild again. People couldn't wait to see what Seagal would say next. When he returned, he didn't come dressed in a designer suit or Hollywood flair. He wore a simple black robe and prayer beads around his wrist. As he walked on stage, the audience gave him a standing ovation before he even spoke. He smiled gently and bowed, whispering, "Thank you." Let's talk about peace. That moment, and quiet, dignified, powerful, solidified what millions already felt. Steven Seagal had not only reclaimed respect, but had redefined it. His clip wasn't viral because it was dramatic. It was viral because it reminded people of something they'd forgotten, that strength and stillness are not opposites. They are one and the same. And as the episode ended, Oprah closed with a line that summed it all up. "I started that conversation trying to test his faith. I ended it realizing, maybe I should strengthen my own." The camera faded out on Seagal's calm, unwavering face, proof that sometimes the loudest message is delivered in silence. In the days that followed, something extraordinary happened. The world didn't just watch Steven Seagal's moment on Oprah. It felt it. Clips of his calm, unwavering composure flooded every corner of the internet. What began as a controversial interview had transformed into a global conversation about faith, humility, and emotional strength. In schools, Teachers played the clip to show students what self-control looks like. In offices, managers shared it during morning meetings to inspire patience under pressure. Even in religious gatherings across multiple faiths, Seagal's words echoed. If someone mocks my faith, it doesn't harm me. It only reveals who they are. People didn't see a celebrity anymore. They saw a man who practiced what he preached. One viral post from a high school teacher read, "I showed this to my students. We discussed how real power isn't in shouting louder, but in standing calmer. Thank you, Steven Seagal." Thousands of comments followed, from Pakistan, Brazil, the Philippines, the US, and beyond, all sharing stories of how they'd been mocked, judged, or provoked, and how they remembered Seagal's example to respond with dignity instead of anger. Meanwhile, Oprah's team uploaded the full uncut interview to her official YouTube channel. Within a week, it hit 50 million views. The top comment read, "This isn't just an interview. This is a life lesson disguised as television." Even Oprah herself admitted during a later podcast episode, "I thought I was interviewing an actor. Turns out I was learning from a monk." The line went viral. Again. But Seagal didn't seek attention. He refused every major talk show request that followed. When journalists asked why he wouldn't speak more about it, he simply replied, "When a tree bears fruit, it doesn't need to talk about being strong. It just stands." That humility made people love him even more. Soon, his moment on Oprah became one of the most rewatched interview clips of the decade. Memes were made, quotes shared, and edits posted, but none of them mocked him. They honored him. It was as if the entire world needed that reminder. That calm is not weakness, that silence is not submission, and that faith, no matter how it's tested, can turn even confrontation into connection. And while millions praised Seagal, he remained true to himself, continuing his charity work, teaching martial arts to underprivileged kids, and mentoring young people about mindfulness and discipline. He later said in a quiet interview for a documentary, "I don't want to be remembered for the movies I made. I want to be remembered for the peace I tried to share." Those words, spoken softly, carried louder than any punch he'd ever thrown on screen. If you believe that faith and respect are stronger than hate and pride, type respect in the comments. Tell me where you're watching this from, your country, your city, and how Steven Seagal's story made you feel. The comments poured in from every corner of the globe. Watching from Manila, thank you for reminding us that peace is strength. From Chicago, this clip changed how I handle anger. Brazil here, what a legend. Calm truly conquers chaos. Pakistan, we need more people like Seagal who teach without ego. The story had outgrown the show. It had become a movement. Back in Los Angeles one quiet morning, Steven Seagal was seen walking through a small Zen garden behind his home. No cameras, no spotlight, just him. Calm, composed, and grateful. A neighbor greeted him saying, "Sir, I saw your video. You handled that so gracefully." Seagal smiled gently and said, "Grace isn't something you show the world. It's something you keep, even when the world isn't watching." And with that, he bowed slightly, turned, and continued walking, the sound of gravel under his feet fading into peaceful silence. For millions who had watched him that night on Oprah, that single exchange, between a mocking question and a calm answer, had become more than television. It was a lesson in humanity, because sometimes the most powerful man in the room isn't the one who speaks the loudest. It's the one who stays silent and still manages to be heard by the whole world.